Hey everybody, it's your Peacekeeper coming at you with the next and last video in our How to Play series for the German battleships. This is the Tier 10 Großer Kurfüst. And for those of you who are paying attention, you will note that I didn't think I was going to get this video done in time, so surprise! Here it is! And the only reason that occurred is because of copious amounts of converting free XP, and the selling off of ships I don't use, namely Friedrich der Große, and reusing all of its upgrades. So, I do have enough games in this to really get a good feel for how the ship plays, and to be quite honest with you, I am thoroughly impressed. After coming from the Friedrich der Große, I had a lot of reservations about a ship that was bigger, had a supposedly worse turning circle and worse rudder shift time, but added an extra gun per turret. So I was a little apprehensive, really, and I thought, well, maybe this will be worse than the US line, where the US line kind of hits its high point at Tier 8 or Tier 9, depending on your playstyle, and then it like nosedives at the Montana. This ship is everything the Montana should be and more. So I really can't complain about that. Before we get to talking about the in-game stats, let's talk a little bit about the history. Well, there isn't a whole lot, and that's because really there's no information about these ships. There's a lot of speculation, and so I won't add to that speculation any. Just in my research from this, I can tell you without a doubt that this ship shares very little in common with the H-41, as many people had thought it did. In fact, if you remember in the Friedrich der Große video, I pointed out that the Friedrich is kind of like a H-39, H-41 mix mash. This ship also shares nothing in common with the later H-40 series, be it the 41, 42, 43, or 44. So, what is it? Well, as best as I can tell, it's some design study, and the guys on the forums are saying it was codenamed H-40B, as in Bravo. I honestly don't know about that. One thing is certain, though, none of the H-series battleships had plans for triple-gun turrets. So these 3-gun turrets are, well, they're entirely paper. And so it wouldn't surprise me if this whole ship is also entirely paper. And with that, yeah, I don't think it really has any history really to add aside from just being, well, it looks like an upscaled Bismarck, and that's probably because that's exactly what it is. Thankfully, it plays that way, too. Also, I vaguely remember one of the Russian developers saying that these turrets came from some design that the Russians requested from the Germans in the interwar period, and the Germans made, and it was found in some vault in some naval archive somewhere in Russia. To me, that screams of, we made it up. But I don't know. I don't have those plans in front of me to confirm or deny that. But suffice it to say, the Germans were not exactly keen on using triple-gun turrets. They didn't like the idea of losing a large portion of their firepower when they lose a turret. That's part of the reason why ships like the Hipper, ships like the Tirpitz and Bismarck, and eventually would have been the Gneisenau and Scharnhorst, stuck with a 2-gun configuration. In fact, there's very few of the German ships that actually had 3-gun turrets. Scharnhorst was one, and the Deutschland-class ships were the other, really, that had the 3-gun turrets. So this is a little bit of an odd departure from the standard affair for German battleships. Now, I'm not complaining too much because, really, as far as I can tell, stats-wise, the dispersion doesn't change between the Friedrich der Große and the Großer Kurfüst. What does change is we get 4 more gun barrels, for a total of 12. When you compact all 12 of those shots into the same dispersion circle, you guessed it, you get a lot more hits on target. So this ship does have a very, very, very capable main armament, and it really is a lot of fun to play. And like I said, I was really worried about that coming from the Friedrich der Große. I was really upset with the way that ship played, and I thought it was just going to be a nosedive after Bismarck, especially since Bismarck was so much fun. But this ship takes everything about the Bismarck, keeps it, but adds in the extra firepower as well. Let's talk about stats. You have the most hit points of any of the ships in the game. At the current, 105,800. That is a lot of freaking hit points. In terms of torpedo damage reduction, it's only 27%, which, it continues with the trend of German battleships not having the world's best TDS. I'm not sure that actually bears out in real life as it does, but for game balancing purposes, it's really low. Honestly, this ship does take a lot of damage from torpedoes. It's probably your biggest worry compared to any other threat. Like, I do not fear a Yamato in this ship. I fear a good Shimikaze captain, or a good Gearing, or a good Khabarovsk captain that's good with his torpedoes. Simply because of the fact that you can't turn and negotiate through them like you can with the other ships in this line. In terms of our main battery, as we already talked, they are 4 triple gun turrets for a total of 12. You still have the option of the 406s or the 420s, and as far as I can tell, the only real differences are a slight reduction in reload time from 29 seconds to 32 seconds, not a huge difference. But you do have an increase in your AP shell damage and HE shell damage. No real change there to the 180-degree turn time of the turrets. They turn plenty quick to do brawling in this ship. I think they even turn faster than the Montanas, which doesn't really surprise me at all. And with that change, you'll note that I definitely have not played this with the 420s. And honestly, I don't find this ship lacking at all with the 406s. In fact, having those 406s felt more than adequate. I felt like I could adequately punish cruisers. I felt like I could still do enough damage to battleships to really drive home the point that I'm here. And it never ceased to amaze me how much penetration they actually had. So there's really no fault there with sticking with the 406s. If the 420s improve all of that without going too far in the penetration department, those could be a very, very powerful option as well. Certainly something I will try later on. In terms of secondaries, this is the next biggest changeover from the Friedrich and the Bismarck. You remember from the Friedrich video that it uses the same secondary complement as the Bismarck, with the 105s being the primary secondary gun, and then the 150s backing them up. Großer Kurfüst ditches the 105s for 128mm guns, basically 5-inch guns, and then keeps the 150s. So you have 5 turrets, twin turrets, on each side with the 128s, and then you have 2 turrets on each side with the 150s. And they still have the same base firing range. It's 10.1 kilometers when fully upgraded for secondary spec, 10.6 if you're running the flag for secondaries. Still have a lot of range on those. The only difference that I can find is that the fire percent chance on the 128s is slightly higher than the fire percent chance on the 105s. You go from being... Oh, no, that's actually a reduction. Okay, well, I'll take that back. Apparently there's a reduction in the fire chance on the 128s, and it is the same for the 150s. So that's the only real change between them. It seems like they do just fine. They have a plenty high rate of fire for what they are. I personally have no complaints about this thing starting fires like every other time the secondaries fire. It is incredible how easily they start fires. Of course, your main battery firing range is still 20.6 kilometers. That's a carryover from Friedrich der Große. The only difference here being that the dispersion circle at 268 meters now packs in 12 shells instead of 8, which makes these guns feel more accurate and more usable at range. I personally didn't have any problems hitting any targets at 20.6 kilometers. It was more than adequate for doing engagements at the beginning of a match, which is one big problem with Friedrich der Große, is it didn't seem like you really were any good until you got inside of about 15 kilometers. In terms of AA, you can see that she does have a 96 AA rating with basic firing training and advanced firing training. There are no AA perks chosen on the upgrades, so interesting. I would be curious to see what the ship would look like with the full AA spec. Of course, this ship really is only module changes and a captain skill change away from having a full AA spec, and you could actually get manual fire AA with a 19-point captain if you played Großer Kurfüst long enough. That would be very interesting to see. I'm sure it's quite potent with all those dual-purpose mounts. And in terms of shooting down aircraft, it feels fine. I mean, it's not Montana levels of ridiculousness, but when when aircraft are inside that dual-purpose gun range, that 6.2 kilometers to about 6, to about 5, it is crazy how well this thing shoots down aircraft, especially lower-tier aircraft carriers, which is predominantly what we're seeing right now, because high-tier carrier gameplay is basically impossible to make money with. In terms of maneuverability, she does have the 30-knot top speed of the Montana, which means the Montana cannot run from you. However, the Montana will turn circles around you. You have a 1,050-meter turning circle, but you have a quicker rudder shift time of 15.5 seconds. It's only like a second quicker than the Montana, so it's not a huge change between the two, but same exact top speed. And honestly, in terms of maneuverability, the ship feels fine. It dances fine. I don't know why Friedrich feels really slow and lethargic, but Großer Kurfüst really feels like a much better handling ship. Granted, it is wider, and so you can't skate through torpedoes nearly as easily. It requires a lot more precision to successfully torpedo beats, as some people like to say. In terms of concealment, this is very odd, but her concealment range by sea is 17.6 kilometers. However, detection range by air is 18.7. That's reverse of what it normally is. Most battleships are far harder to detect by air, but for some odd reason, Großer Kurfüst is much easier to detect by air. And if you look at the size of this thing, that's not terribly hard to understand. Alright, the upgrades are basically a repeat of Friedrich der Große. Main armament, Mod 1. That has been a standard since the get-go. Secondary battery, Mod 2. That has been standard on everything except for Bayern, the only ship that I could not get to work with the secondary build. And secondary battery, Mod 3 for the reduction in load time. Damage control, Mod 1 to reduce your risk of getting set on fire, which is already plenty high. Steering gears Mod 2 to reduce that rudder shift time, and target acquisition systems Mod 1 to see torpedoes from even further out. Well, like I said, in terms of gameplay, she feels like a very much upscaled Bismarck, and really plays about the same, so let's dive right into that video. Alright, so this battle is obviously going to be a Tier 10 fight, but as you're about to see, it has a lot of Tier 10 battleships. In fact, there are 3 of them in each side. 2 Yamatos and a Großer Kurfüst per side. There is also, well, actually, the battleships are balanced across the board. North Carolina, Tirpitz, Bismarck. So we have exactly the same complement of battleships on each side. So nobody can say this is because one team had the worst battleship complement in the game. In terms of other things, they do have an extra destroyer to our cruiser. So we have an extra cruiser. That's really not a good trade-off on this map, but that's okay. And like I like to always do on these maps, is until the battle really evolves, I'm going to choose one or the other, either B or C, unless it's just obvious that we can steamroll A, which, judging by the fact that I'm all the way on this side of the map with the North Carolina and not a Yamato, I don't think we're going to be able to do. I'm going to choose either B or C, whichever one is furthest from me. And this gives me the opportunity to kind of see what the battlefield is developing and how it's all developing, because really these ships in pub matches benefit the most from taking advantage of holes in the enemy lines, which is something that, honestly, no other ship really excels at, aside from destroyers maybe, and some very cheeky cruisers like Zhao, which have good stealth and can kind of hold their own a little bit. So we're going to kind of feint over here towards B to kind of figure out what's going on with their team. And that should give us a pretty good idea of where we need to go from there. Now, this video doesn't show a whole lot of what I'm going to call close-in brawling. There is some. We do end up fighting a Bismarck here almost right away at the beginning. But really, this video shows a lot about the capabilities of the guns at longer range. And really, their punchiness, too. So, as you can see, we got shot out. I believe that was a Kutuzov that was right next to me. And you can see our shell dispersion is pretty comparable at the same range. Only I'm taking off 8,300 and he's probably taking off like 2 grand. But since it appears that their entire team is going to go A, B, I'm going to turn around and I'm going to push through C. And this flanking maneuver, even with just the 30 knot speed, which you really don't see too much of, but even with that speed, it really allows this ship to have some flexibility in its combat choices. If we were in like a low-tier US battleship, I'd be like, ah, heck no. We ain't going anywhere near the opposite side of the map from where they're at. But in this case, we're going to push through C and see if we can't push an advantage where we kind of surround them, which actually ends up what happens in this match, is they get very spread out and they get kind of picked off one by one. Also to note, their Lexington is, if I remember correctly, a strike Lexington, and we have a balanced Shikaku, and yeah, that doesn't end well. Strike Lexingtons don't end well, so we're going to go ahead and get those guys lit up so that, or selected, so that when they come close enough, we can go ahead and engage them. Of course, once the torpedo bombers go out of visual range, we lose that, so we got to make sure we keep that up. But we're also going to set our secondaries on the Bismarck because I'm 99% sure they could shoot over this island if the game would allow them to. However, they don't. It's really annoying, actually. It seems like they have to have a direct visual line of sight to shoot over things, and that's really quite frustrating for lots of secondary stuff. So there's a North Carolina as well in this area, although he looks like he hasn't fully loaded in at the moment. Because this Bismarck's getting closer, and because we're coming up to a cap that I don't have anyone spotting over, I want to see what's coming ahead. And with all of the destroyers in this game, admittedly they've lost one, but with all the destroyers in this game, you just never know when you're going to come through one of these channels and it's going to be shut down by one of their destroyers. You can see 2 of their destroyers are at B and the others at A, so we're good to go. We're just going to keep pushing on through. And really, this is the decision-making time because there's no way for this ship to turn around once we get on the other side of this island. So I'm going to prep myself in case there's a lot of ships that I can't see. I'm pretty sure all of them have been spotted with the exception of the carrier. But we're going to angle ourselves to this Bismarck. He's the closest and most obvious threat. I lose like 1,000 hit points to the 1 Mark 8 shell hitting the superstructure of my ship. And here we are to engage this Bismarck. Now, he's shooting HE at me, so going broadside is really not that big of a deal. He's also opening up to me. So, surprise! 11K right off the bat. We are 2 salvos in and already above 20,000 damage. Thank you, German superstructures. One other thing that's key to dueling matches between German battleships is to make sure that you are using your repairs wisely with fires that start up. If you burn it on the first one that shows up, it's not a good thing. And there is 16,000 to finish him off. Second salvo into the match. Actually, correction, third salvo into the match, and 46,000 damage. That's, well, if we keep this up, I'll hit the server average here pretty shortly. So we're going to keep on pushing through to B. I mean, we've got all the support. We got ourselves a North Carolina and whatever that other ship was. I think it was a Tirpitz following me, so we'll just go ahead and keep on pushing through. And this North Carolina deserves to get sunk with that camo on. You can see I asked for a destroyer screen, and that's because the last known location of the 2 remaining destroyers that they have were in that B area. And it makes me very nervous pushing ahead without some form of destroyer screen. The part that rubbed me the wrong way about the way this match was going is that our Shikaku is really focused on doing damage to the enemy capital ships and not very focused on addressing the issues surrounding the lack of, well, the lack of spotting of the destroyers. I mean, 2 of them are dead, but there's still 2 remaining. Okay, so one of them just popped up on the mini-map there. You can see him. He's in the E4 line. The other one is still a big unknown where he's at. He could be in A, unlikely, because if you look, that's where all the ships are. Or he could be in B coming my way. So it makes me nervous. So I'm going to turn, and I'm going to turn away from B cap simply because of the fact that I don't have any destroyer screen. Not from the carrier, whose aircraft are kind of dilly-dallying around the map, doing God knows what, or from any destroyers. So we've turned ourselves away. That means we have to cycle our guns back and forth, and I usually don't like doing that, but it's kind of a necessity with the lack of real strong destroyer screening. And you can see I'm basically ignoring the North Carolina, and he's basically ignoring me. And there's a very valid reason for that. One, I'm presenting a profile to him that does not mean he will pen me. And two, he's just not doing any damage to me. There's probably other targets to shoot at. Any aircraft is going to town. Secondaries are going to town on the North Carolina, which is part of the reason why I'm letting my really not focusing him down at this point in time. Plus, we've got that carrier there that we took about 7K off of. And you can also see we are now above the server average in terms of damage. So, and here's a pretty solid hit on the Lexington, 21,000 damage. Still no citadels, in fact, in this match. And I don't think there is any citadels in this match. It's all white damage, normal pens. And maybe that's the strong suit for these 406s that I'm currently mounting onto this ship. Also, because the Lexington is now out of range and this North Carolina is really the last ship left, we want to angle ourselves back to a more favorable angle. And there goes the North Carolina. Now we're going to continue to focus our attention on this Lexington, but we've got a Großer Kurfüst and a Tirpitz that can shoot at me. Not necessarily worried about the Tirpitz. His guns are going to have a hard time at this range punching through, but the Großer Kurfüst could be packing 420s, and those 420s hurt. But he'll be out of range here soon enough, and it won't be as big of an issue at that point in time. So another salvo out on the Lexington. And if I remember correctly, this leaves him with a whopping 401 hit points. Yep, 401 hit points. Of course, Tirpitz firing at me, doing no damage, lots of bounces. Congratulating the carrier on his RNG victory, of course. Yep, 401 hit points. That's not going to last long. You are now dead. Moving on. Yep, it's going to kill him. Don't worry about it, game me. Move along. Okay, so now we've got, well, we've got a Kurfürst, a Yamato, and a Tirpitz is really all that's left that I can see. And, of course, Tirpitz is presenting the most ideal profile, which is a broadside. And this is really showing how capable these guns are in the mid-range. And I almost want to say it's frightening, because this used to be the... Yeah, okay, you took 5K off. This used to be the strength of the U.S. battleship line, and to have that really taken away is quite sad and actually quite maddening. He is turning away from me, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to launch him just a little bit above his deck so that they impact more amidships into the superstructure. And as you can see, there's 13,000 off of a Tirpitz. And we're going to keep on shooting at him. We are just steamrolling him. We've got 3 caps. One thing to keep in mind is that destroyer that I pointed out earlier that was in the E4 line, his last known location was in D5. And that's been a couple minutes. And as a result, I'm very nervous about him. So we're going to turn into B, and we're going to go through B and kind of head off the ships that are coming up through A. Of course, there's one solid hit that does no damage. Thanks for the module damage, I guess. I don't know. Oh, that destroyer just popped up now. He is in D6 in the lower right-hand corner, almost into E6, almost into E7. And the carrier really needs to address that if this match is to go on. Granted, we have a points lead, so there's not a huge work. Oh. Nearly dead Tirpitz. Yep, we'll go ahead and secure that kill, especially since it said I could shoot over that island, so... And Großer Kurfüst put in one that disabled a turret. Pretty good solid hit, but we took out the Tirpitz before that became a problem. Now all that's left is that destroyer, which who knows where the heck he went. I'm assuming he's coming back to B, possibly going to C. Not entirely sure, but we are going to take precautionary steps regardless. And there's the hydro setup. So again, I'm going to point out where this DD is supposedly at in the hopes that our CV will spot him so that I know where he's at. And the CV will spot that destroyer here going into C, so I'm not as concerned. That means we can sit here and focus our attention on the Großer Kurfüst. Of course, with manual secondaries, remember that in order for them to actually shoot at any targets, you actually have to manually select them. And no damage. Again, one penetrating hit that does no damage on that Kurfürst. And, well, end of the match. Right there. So there's the end of the match. 145,000 damage. 145,310. 1,617 base XP, 4 sinks, 7 aircraft, not a whole lot of aircraft. There you can see the secondaries and fire damage, and then there is the reward screen. Anyway, I really enjoy the Großer Kurfüst, and I'm glad that the pinnacle of the German battleship line is not a joke like it is for the U.S. battleships. I really hope that the U.S. battleship Montana gets some attention, but it doesn't sound like Wargaming is real interested in helping that ship out in the performance metrics in which it is lacking, mostly damage, somewhat in survivability and accuracy. But I'm just really glad that at least there's one Tier 10 battleship that I actually get along with and that is a lot of fun to play. And I'm glad it is nothing like Friedrich, which was such a sad ship to play. So, anyway, I'm your Peacekeeper, and you guys know the drill. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you guys for watching.